when a homeless boy shouted, "Don't eat that!" Zorania, no one expected what would happen next. The Park Cafe was a place of luxury where the city's elite gathered for business lunches and quiet afternoon meals. At the best table in the house sat Bernard Green, a billionaire who built his empire from the ground up. At 72, he had seen everything, except for what was about to happen that day. Across from him sat Marissa, his much younger wife. She was stunning, poised, and elegant, her diamond bracelet catching the sunlight as she absent-mindedly scrolled through her phone. She wasn't paying attention to Bernard. She wasn't paying attention to much of anything, except for the small vial she had just slipped out of her handbag. Just beyond the patio railing, a boy lingered, Malik. Small for his age, barely noticeable to the well-dressed customers around him. His oversized hoodie was worn and tattered, his dark eyes darting between tables, scanning plates and pockets, not to steal, but out of pure hunger. Then he saw something strange. Marissa's hand moved with practiced ease. A flick of her wrist. A clear liquid, barely visible, poured into Bernard's soup. Then a slow stir, as if nothing had happened. Malik's heart pounded. Did he really just see that? His stomach growled, but the hunger was gone now, replaced with something colder. Fear. He wanted to walk away. What if he was wrong? What if no one believed him? What if they did, but it didn't matter? But then Bernard lifted his spoon. Malik didn't think. He just moved. "Don't eat that." His voice cut through the cafe like a knife. Conversation stopped. Forks clattered onto plates. Bernard froze, the spoon inches from his lips, his sharp eyes locking onto the boy. Marissa turned so fast her chair screeched against the stone floor. Her expression went from startled to furious in a blink. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice sharp as glass. Malik took a deep breath, standing his ground. "She put something in your food. I saw her. Don't eat it." A gasp rippled through the cafe. Bernard's face changed, his usual commanding presence now filled with hesitation. He looked at his wife, then at the soup, then back at Malik. Marissa's hands clenched into fists. "That's ridiculous," she spat. "He's lying. Who even let this kid in here?" But Malik didn't back down. "I'm not lying. She poured something into your soup when you weren't looking. You can even smell it." Bernard's hand trembled slightly as he set the spoon down. His piercing gaze turned to his wife. "Marissa?" His voice was calm, but laced with something dangerous. "What's going on?" Marissa's mask of composure cracked. She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "You're seriously entertaining this? He's just some street kid looking for attention. Look at him. He probably wants money." But Bernard didn't look away from her. "Then why does he look terrified?" Silence. Marissa opened her mouth, then closed it. The cafe felt heavier. Eyes were on her. Eyes were on them. Bernard picked up his spoon again, but this time he didn't eat. He raised it closer to his face and sniffed, his brow furrowed. He turned back to Marissa. "What did you put in my soup?" Her breath hitched. "This is insane, Bernard. Just eat your damn soup so we can go." But he didn't move. The weight of her words, her urgency. It wasn't right. Then Malik took another step forward, his small hands clenched into fists. "If you don't believe me, get it tested. You have lawyers, doctors, call someone, but don't eat it." A tense pause. Bernard's mind raced. Something was off. Something was very off. And then he made his decision. He turned to the waiter nearby. "Call the police." Marissa's face drained of color. "Bernard." Now. And in that moment, the truth began to unravel. The waiter froze for a moment before rushing inside to make the call. The cafe was silent. Too silent. The tension thickened as Bernard locked eyes with Marissa, waiting for an answer she wasn't giving. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to mask her panic. "Bernard," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You can't be serious? You're really listening to some dirty street rat over your own wife?" Bernard didn't blink. "If he's lying, you have nothing to worry about." Marissa's lips pressed into a thin line. She straightened, flipping her hair over her shoulder, as if the simple gesture could restore her control over the situation. "This is insane," she muttered. "You're making a scene." Bernard leaned back, crossing his arms. "No, you made a scene when you got caught." Marissa inhaled sharply, The cafe patrons whispered amongst themselves, their curious eyes glued to the unfolding drama. Phones were being pulled out, cameras rolling. Malik didn't move. He was still standing, heart pounding, but he refused to let the fear take over. He had done what was right. Now it was up to Bernard. The distant sound of sirens grew louder. Marissa's fingers twitched against her handbag, her mind racing. Her gaze flickered toward the exit, but before she could make a move, Bernard's voice stopped her cold. "Don't even think about it." She turned back, eyes burning with rage. "You don't get to control me, Bernard." His expression didn't change. "Then tell me what's in the soup." Her mouth opened, then closed. "Tell me," he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because right now, I can't think of a single reason why you'd act this way unless you had something to hide." The sirens were close now. A police car pulled up in front of the cafe, and 2 officers stepped out. The entire cafe held its breath as they approached the table. One officer, a tall man with sharp eyes, scanned the scene. "We got a call about a possible poisoning." Bernard nodded and gestured toward the soup. "That bowl needs to be tested." He turned his gaze toward Marissa. "And she's the one you should be questioning." Marissa bolted. She barely made it 2 steps before the second officer caught her arm, holding her in place. "Not so fast, ma'am." "Get off me!" she hissed, thrashing, but the officer held firm. "Ma'am," the first officer said, "we need to ask you some questions. Is there anything you want to tell us before we send this to forensics?" Marissa clenched her jaw, her face turning an angry shade of red. "This is ridiculous. I'm his wife. You think I'd poison my own husband?" "Then let us test it," the officer said simply. Bernard sighed, rubbing his temples. "Marissa, why?" For the first time since the confrontation started, her eyes flickered with something new. Panic. The officer took the soup bowl, sealing it inside an evidence bag. Malik watched silently, his fists still clenched. He didn't know if they'd believe him. He didn't know if justice would be served. But then, Marissa cracked. "Fine," she spat. "You want the truth? You're so damn smart, Bernard. Then here it is. You were never supposed to make it past this year." Gasps. Audible shock rippled through the cafe. Bernard's face went pale. "Excuse me?" Marissa yanked her arm free, eyes wild. "You never paid attention, did you?" she sneered. "All those times you got sick, all those little accidents, that was me, Bernard. That was all me." Bernard felt the world tilt. His mind raced, replaying the moments, sudden fevers, unexplained dizziness, the fall down the stairs last winter that he'd chalked up to bad luck. It wasn't bad luck. His voice was hoarse. "You were trying to kill me?" Marissa let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, don't look so surprised. You never loved me. I was just another one of your trophies. But guess what? I was tired of playing the role of the perfect little wife while you sat on your throne. I deserved everything you had, Bernard. Everything." The officer pulled out his handcuffs. "That's enough." But Marissa wasn't done. She turned her rage onto Malik, her eyes burning with hatred. "And you," she snarled. "You just couldn't keep your nose out of it, could you? Stupid little rat, I should have— Shut up!" The words came from Bernard, loud, commanding, final. For the first time, Marissa stopped talking. Bernard stood, his expression unreadable. "You almost killed me," he said quietly. "And you're standing here acting like you were the victim?" Marissa opened her mouth, but Bernard didn't let her speak. "You're pathetic." His voice was void of emotion. "And now, you'll rot in a prison cell where you belong." The officer pulled Marissa's hands behind her back, locking the cuffs into place. "You don't understand," she shrieked. "I was supposed to have everything." The officers started leading her away. Bernard exhaled, shaking his head. The world around him felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's life unravel. Then he turned to Malik. The boy looked exhausted, his small shoulders tense. He expected Bernard to yell at him, maybe even blame him. But instead, Bernard pulled out the chair across from him. "Sit." Malik blinked. "What?" "Sit," Bernard repeated. "You saved my life today. The least I can do is buy you a meal." The tension in Malik's face cracked just a little. He hesitated, but then, slowly, he took a seat. Bernard waved the waiter over. "Bring him whatever he wants, and put it on my bill." The waiter nodded and hurried off. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Bernard leaned forward, studying the boy who had just saved his life. "What's your name?" Malik shifted in his seat. "Malik." "Well, Malik," Bernard said, tapping his fingers against the table. "How long have you been living on the streets?" The boy tensed. "Why do you care?" Bernard exhaled. "Because I think I owe you something, and not just a meal." Malik frowned. "What are you saying?" Bernard leaned forward. "I have more money than I could ever spend in a lifetime," he said, "and I've wasted it on people who never deserved it. But today, you proved something." Malik's eyes narrowed. "What?" Bernard's expression softened. "That the richest people aren't always the ones with the most money." Malik sat still, unsure what to say. Bernard nodded. "You don't have to live on the streets anymore, kid. You saved my life. Let me help change yours." And for the first time in years, Malik felt something he hadn't known in a long time: hope. Malik sat across from Bernard, unsure if this was real. Was this some kind of trick? Rich people didn't just help kids like him. They didn't even see kids like him. But Bernard wasn't looking at him like a rich man looking at a beggar. He was looking at him like a person. The cafe had begun to settle back into normalcy, but every now and then, someone still stole glances at their table. The whispers hadn't stopped completely. Malik could feel the eyes on him, like he didn't belong here. But Bernard didn't care. The older man leaned back in his chair, watching Malik closely. "How long have you been out here?" Malik hesitated. He didn't like talking about it. Every time someone asked, it just reminded him of how alone he was. "A while," he finally mumbled. Bernard raised an eyebrow. "How long is a while?" Malik shifted uncomfortably. "Couple years." Bernard's expression darkened. "Years?" Malik shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "Yeah." The waiter returned with a plate of food. A real meal. Not scraps, not something half-eaten from the trash. A steaming plate of pasta, bread, even a glass of juice. Malik's mouth watered. It had been days since he'd had a full meal. He glanced at Bernard as if asking permission. "Go ahead," Bernard said simply. Malik didn't need to be told twice. He picked up the fork and ate. Bernard watched him, his face unreadable. "Where are your parents?" Malik slowed down, staring at his plate. "Don't know," he muttered. "Haven't seen my mom since I was 10. My dad—" He paused, swallowing. "Gone." Bernard didn't push. He just nodded. Malik kept eating. He needed this food, but part of him still expected it to be snatched away at any moment. Bernard was silent for a long moment, then finally said, "You did something today that most grown men wouldn't have had the courage to do." Malik glanced up, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. "Yeah, well, I couldn't just let her poison you." "You could have walked away," Bernard pointed out. "You could have ignored it, kept your head down like everyone else." Malik scowled. "I don't like seeing people get hurt." Bernard nodded. "That's a rare quality, kid." Malik looked away. He didn't want praise. He just did what was right. But then Bernard leaned forward. "I want to help you," he said. Malik blinked. "What?" "I don't just mean buying you lunch," Bernard continued. "I mean really help you. A place to stay, clothes." School Malik's heart stopped. He swallowed, his fork clattering against the plate. "Why would you do that?" Bernard sighed. "Because I know what it's like to have nothing." Malik frowned. "Yeah, right." Bernard smirked. "You think I was always rich?" Malik shrugged. "Aren't all rich people born rich?" Bernard chuckled. "Not even close." He leaned back. "I grew up in a small apartment with 3 siblings. We didn't have money. We barely had food. I worked my way up from nothing." Malik stared at him, unsure whether to believe him. "So what? You want to make yourself feel better by helping some street kid?" Malik muttered. Bernard's smile faded. "I want to help because someone once helped me." That caught Malik off guard. "Who?" Bernard's gaze grew distant, as if he were seeing something from decades ago. "When I was 16, I was working odd jobs, sleeping in a basement, stealing food when I had to." Malik stiffened. That sounded way too familiar. "But then one day," Bernard continued, "a man caught me trying to take bread from his shop." Malik raised an eyebrow. "And he just let you take it?" "No," Bernard said. He made me a deal, work for him, honest work, and he'd give me food, a place to sleep. Malik frowned. Why? Bernard smiled faintly. Because he told me something I never forgot. A person's worth isn't measured by where they come from, but by the choices they make. Malik didn't say anything. Bernard leaned forward again. You made a choice today, Malik, a choice that most people wouldn't have made. Malik swallowed. Bernard continued, his voice softer now. And if someone hadn't taken a chance on me back then, I never would have made it out. I wouldn't be sitting here today. So now, I want to return the favor. Malik's chest tightened. This was too good to be true. No one helped kids like him. No one just offered things without wanting something in return. What's the catch? He asked quietly. Bernard chuckled. No catch. Malik narrowed his eyes. There's always a catch. Bernard sighed. The only thing I expect, that you try, that you let someone help you for once. Malik hesitated. He wanted to say no. He wanted to walk away, like he always did. He wanted to convince himself that it wasn't real, but a part of him, the part that still hoped, whispered, "What if?" The wind shifted, carrying the distant sounds of sirens disappearing down the street. The chaos was over. For the first time in a long time, Malik had a choice. Bernard extended a hand. Malik stared at it. Seconds passed. His heart pounded. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and shook Bernard's hand. Malik's fingers wrapped around Bernard's hand, his grip hesitant, uncertain. He had spent years surviving on his own, trusting no one. But in this moment, something in Bernard's eyes told him that maybe, just maybe, this was different. Bernard gave his hand a firm shake, then let go. You don't have to decide everything right now, he said. Just let me help you. A place to stay, food. And if you want, we figure out the rest later. Malik stared at him, his heart pounding. It sounded too good to be true, but at the same time, why would he lie? Bernard didn't need anything from him. He wasn't trying to trick him. Malik swallowed hard. And if I don't like it? He asked quietly. If I want to leave? Bernard leaned back. Then you leave. No strings, no debt. He smirked. I'd bet you'll want to stay, though. Malik studied his face, searching for any hint of dishonesty. But there was none. For the first time in a long time, someone saw him. Really saw him. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Okay, he mumbled. Bernard's smile was small but warm. Good. Just then, the waiter returned, looking slightly nervous. Sir, the police just left, but, there's a crowd outside. Reporters. Malik tensed immediately. He hated crowds, hated attention. Bernard sighed. Of course there are. Word had spread fast. The high society Bernard Green almost being poisoned by his own wife? That was front-page news. Bernard glanced at Malik. You don't have to deal with this. We can leave through the back. Malik nodded quickly. He didn't want cameras in his face. He'd spent too much of his life being invisible. He wasn't ready to change that. Bernard stood, tossing a few $100 bills onto the table. Let's go. As they moved toward the back exit, Malik hesitated. For years he had walked away from things. It was how he survived. But this time, he wasn't walking away alone. 1 week later. The soft hum of the heater filled the room as Malik sat at a dining table inside an actual house. Bernard's house. He still wasn't used to it. The soft bed, the warm showers, the fridge full of food. No more sleeping in the cold. No more digging through trash cans. But the weirdest part? No one was waiting for him to leave. No one was expecting him to fail. Bernard walked in, holding a newspaper. You're famous, you know. Malik glanced up, raising an eyebrow. What? Bernard tossed the newspaper onto the table. Right on the front page was a photo of him, mid-shout, stopping Bernard from eating the poisoned soup. Homeless boy saves billionaire from attempted poisoning. Malik's stomach twisted. He hated that word, homeless. I didn't do it to be famous, he muttered. Bernard sat across from him, nodding. I know. He tapped the newspaper. But this is going to change your life. Malik frowned. How? Bernard leaned forward. Because people are reaching out, schools, programs, even companies. They want to help you. Malik's mind spun. Why? Bernard chuckled. Because you prove something most people forget. Doing the right thing still matters. Malik shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with all the attention. I don't know, he muttered. I never planned for all this. Bernard studied him for a moment. Then take it one step at a time. Malik exhaled. He wasn't sure he believed in second chances, but maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was just the beginning. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change lives in ways we never expect. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Malik's situation? And remember, kindness and bravery can come from anyone, anywhere. Stay tuned for more stories that will move, inspire, and remind you of the power of doing what's right. See you in the next video.